Everyone dreams about living an uncommon life, but how we define that dream is very different for each of us. And for most, it's a lifelong pursuit. Welcome to the Uncommon Life Project podcast. We're going to introduce you to people who are living that life or enjoying the journey to get there. We're going to also give you some tools, tricks, and tips for starting or accelerating your own efforts to live an uncommon life, a life worth celebrating and savoring. Please welcome your hosts, Brian Dewhurst and Philip Ramsey.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Uncommon Life Project, where I'm your host, Philip Ramsey.
And I am Brian Dewhurst.
Thanks for tuning in to another recording. We're grateful that you stopped in. First, Brian and I have been doing a lot of work with individuals, helping them go down their own uncommon path. So I cannot wait to record this show and get the one and only Kathy Davis on the show, unpack her story a little bit, and then hopefully this encourages you to go down this path. So, Brian, let's start with the bio. Then I want to get Kathy on the show, and then let's get this going.
All right. Well, we are talking about the one and only Duane and Kathy. We only have Kathy with us today, though. But Duane and Kathy live the uncommon life in central Iowa and homeschool their 4 children. Duane broke out of the golden handcuffs in August 2020, and they use multifamily properties to live their uncommon life and generate residual income. So welcome to the show, Kathy Davis.
Thank you. I am super excited to be here.
You know, it's funny because we got introduced to Duane and Kathy, and from the immediate, we were like kindred spirits. And from the bio, you can tell why. Duane was actually working at a fairly big organization and felt like there's got to be a different thing to do, or there's got to be a better way. So, Kathy, you're obviously like on the front seat to this, and you've always been uncommon. But let's talk about that. When Duane came home from an amazing job and said, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore." Tell me that thought process and tell me what you were doing and how you were processing that together.
Well, he did. He enjoyed what he did for a long time, and really liked the challenges and liked the environment and liked who he was working with and all those things. And as most people who spend time in corporate America know, there is lots of, what should I say, like reorging. We're constantly reorging. Mm-hmm. And he used to be able to pick out really good when he could see a reorg coming and brace himself for it and shift and adapt. And then it just got to where the cycle of reorging was sucking the joy out of his life. Constant layoffs, and then turn around and we have to rehire. We have this money now, we need to rehire. And just that cycle really started to wear on him. And there just became a point where I could see it coming, and I didn't know any other way. We didn't know any other way. And so it would always leave, these cycles and stuff would leave us kind of panicking, because he also, and I think a lot of people experience this when they spend time in corporate America, but he kind of worked his way into kind of a corner where his skills were maybe not as adaptable as, jumping to other companies. It would appear that he could do that, but he just didn't feel confident that would be, that would be the case, that his skill set was becoming more and more refined rather than expanded. So this was probably the last 7 years. He just things were getting worse and worse. And I had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, actually about 7 years beforehand. And I just was blown away by just the simple idea of you coming up with enough residual passive income to be able to step away from that salaried job. And I had filed the ideas away in the back of my head, not really thinking that we would, eventually do that, because I know enough about marriage and how it works that I knew I would have to have Duane's full buy-in for us to do something like that. Well, he got miserable enough that I said, "Hey, what about..."
You indoctrinated him.
I did. And we had actually met with an Edward Jones guy, and he had, put our financial picture up on the board like they do. And we didn't have very much real estate. We had very little real estate in our portfolio. And when we walked out of that meeting, Duane turned to me and said, "What do you think about getting some rentals?" And I said, "That's exactly what I want to do." I said, let's do it. And so I was already kind of in that mindset and knew that could potentially be what his ticket out of the golden handcuffs would look like. And so we did have a couple close friends that had real estate or rentals. And because we knew nothing, we literally knew nothing. Both of our parents had maybe one rental growing up, but it wasn't either of our parents' thing. It was
like a side hustle, maybe more.
Well, it was for my husband's family. It was just a little side hustle thing that his grandma lived in, and it was like 2 apartments, and so they rented out the other one. And for my parents, it was my grandparents' house. My mom tried renting it for a while, and so we'd had very little exposure to that. And my husband had all of his career had been for the most part, behind a computer, and you just get it. I mean, I hear about it going the other way, but you just get sick of that. And so the idea of doing things with his hands and fixing things, and he's good at that stuff anyway, adapting and figuring those things out. But that appealed to him. That totally appealed to him. And so we start looking, and in Rich Dad Poor Dad, he says, find your niche. Find what your niche is. And so we start, actually it was me because Duane was still working all the time. I started looking at houses, single family houses. And we didn't see anything. I would bring home, options, and it just didn't,
it takes time.
Resonating with us. It does.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking that in the back of my head, we have to find our niche. There's gotta be some niche. And an 8-plex in a neighboring town came up for sale, and we actually didn't even see it. It was our neighbor that has other rentals. He said, "Hey, this would be a good fit for you guys, and I think you could do this. And if you don't buy it, I will." And
I think there's an important lesson there that you verbalized your intentions with other people, that helped bring that first property to the table, which can typically be a dangerous thing, but like they were already in the rental business. A lot of times you tell your family, "Hey, I have an idea," and they don't have any experience with that. And then they shoot it down, they take the bow and arrow in their hand and they just shoot at it. And so, but when you get around the right people and like-mindedness, you can actually find the opportunities that you're looking for, a lot easier. But yes. I think one of the principles that we see a lot is, especially with real estate, is you've got to look at several deals to probably get your first one. And a lot of people quit, like heard some people, we made an offer and it didn't work. And then they just totally quit, And so I think that was a big part of your guys' testimony with this, is that you were just kind of relentless.
Yeah, definitely. And that was something else that was really helpful out of Rich Dad Poor Dad, is he said, get in the habit of looking at stuff. And I try to tell friends that I know that are thinking about this, like, even if you're a long ways from pulling the trigger, look at this stuff every day. Just look at a few listings, look at a few things. And, I think that's true of like car shopping or anything. Even if you're a long ways away from being ready to buy something, at least you know what you're looking at. It's kind of it's an education. And so then when the deal we wanted came through, we're like, oh yeah, that's
you were ready.
We'd seen lots of single family houses that were for what we paid for this 8-plex. And so
no brainer.
That was a no-brainer.
So you were kind of talking about your niche, and I alluded to it in your bio. But you guys have, I think, carved out a niche in real estate. And I want you to talk a little bit more about that, because I live in a smaller town, similar to where, you guys are renting, and I think you guys have done a good job. Yeah. I think you guys have done a good job. So kind of talk about what, you were looking for? I know you don't want to create competition in the marketplace for your niche, but just kind of talk about how you have carved out your niche and what it is.
Every small town in Iowa, and I assume this is probably around the Midwest, there was a time period in the late 70s, early 80s when the USDA came in and built one-story apartments. And they come in varying sizes depending on the size of the town. Most of them come in an 8-plex. And they were originally run by in a lot of cases, they were run by nonprofits, a small board of people in the town. It's kind of maybe senior housing was the original intent. And someone told me once, and the USDA subsidized a lot of these because they retired the wives of retired farmers or widowed farm wives needed a place to live, or so that's what was perceived as being the case. And so what's happened over time is that's not really a need anymore. It's not really meeting the original need. And so the nonprofit side of it, or the small board of people that were in charge of it, no longer want to do that, and no one wants to step in. And so slowly over time, or just to whatever led to the decision, the nonprofit dissolved and they sold the property. Well, every scenario looks a little different across the state, because we've run into, a few different scenarios. But actually, our original purchase, I'm not sure really, it was intended to be senior housing, but it's been owned privately. We're probably the fourth owners of it. And so that's kind of what we started looking for, are these, one-story plexes. Sometimes they're as small as 4 apartments in a thing. Sometimes it's as many as, oh man, where you live, Brian, isn't there? I think there's a 24.
Yeah.
I think there's a 24 on one side of town. So they vary in size, but that's kind of the gist. And what we like is we like a lot of things about them. They're pretty straightforward to operate, pretty, really, really easy to get tenants because it's pretty affordable and just a simple setup. And small town Iowa is relatively quiet. So
people pay their bills, treat the property decent, stay a while.
Yep.
So how do you get knowledgeable on something you've never been knowledgeable before? You just jump in head first, like hope the water's deep enough. Like, how do you do that?
Well, you set aside a lot of fear, and you just have to push the fear aside. And I think being we weren't desperate, but we really wanted this to work. We really, really wanted it to work. And we were confident in our abilities to figure it out. And there's no shortcut to learning. I mean, there's no shortcut to learning these things. So just through different experiences, it's like, oh, okay. And like when we'd only owned the property a couple weeks, and for some reason I had a plumber out there. I think it was to redo some of the shower heads, and the plumber happened to say something about, oh, hey, let's take a look at your water fixture that comes in from the street and how it supplies this plex. Okay, so we hadn't seen that when we had done the walkthrough of the property before buying it, but I knew where it was, and we unlocked the door, and the plumber says, that's about to blow. He said, see how that's dripping? It was the original fixture, and it was on the brink of total water explosion. It was all rusted and leaking. And so he said, you need that replaced, and you need that replaced right now. And he said, he moved us up on the schedule because they originally wouldn't have had time to schedule it, and brought a couple guys that day. And so, we had to shut off water to the whole plex that day. And so they got it done in a few hours. But anyway, all that to say, like, there's things like that you just learn through the hard knocks,
And is Duane still working at his big company at this point, or did he now
At that
quit?
point he was,
Okay.
but we quickly figured out how many we needed to own for him to leave. We knew you figure out what your monthly income is. Yeah. And so then it just became, okay, if this is what kind of profit we can see for each one of these, what's how many? It's just a numbers game at that point. And we liked it. We liked what we were doing. So that helped. And also, and this, I think is important for people to know, if you want something, it's probably, it may not come up on the market, and that was the first one we bought was the only one that was on the market. Everything else we bought after that, we had to go asking owners for. We would figure out who the owner was and just approach them and say, hey, are you willing to sell? What's the worst thing they're going to say? It's no. If you don't ask, it's going to be a no anyway.
That's great.
So,
that's great.
Now that you've carved out this niche, you have a lot more confidence going to these people in these towns because we know what we're dealing with. We know we can maintain it. We know it can be a good, positive thing for the town, the community. Yeah. And now you're kind of like a leader in that as you go and approach these other buildings that are coming up for sale.
Right. And some of them, if they are still owned, the second one we bought was still owned by the nonprofit. It was still in nonprofit status. And so, one of the things we realized through that process was, hey, now this is a taxable property in the town, because before it wasn't collecting any property tax. So there are some, if you can find whatever you're wanting to work through, if you can find out how the other party benefits, that goes a long ways.
Right.
Okay, I want to ask this because I think there's definitely a fun answer here. How have you educated your children through this as you've been going down this uncommon path? Like, obviously you homeschool, so I feel like this is kind of an alley-oop, but how have they learned and seen you and Duane changed and evolve through this process? And how do you think their lives are impacted because of your trajectory?
I think they've done a fair amount of eye rolling. Here's mom and dad again, going again. But it's helped. It's walking that uncommon path. I think stepping outside of the box. I'm the kind of person that I don't assume that because everyone else is doing it, that it's the best or that it's right or right for us. I'm very contrarian in my view about that. And so my kids to some extent are used to that, but they saw their dad's desperation to leave. And so that we didn't just sit around and complain and wring our hands and say, what, I guess we're just going to have to live with this. No, we said, okay, we're going to come up with a plan. And they watched us fight through that plan because there was lots of up and downs. And so, the number of times that we'd hear no, we'd approach different, we'd think we'd have a pretty good option, and we'd approach somebody and they'd say no, and go, okay, back to the drawing board. What else can we do? And so that's been, I think, just that perseverance and knowing that just because someone is successful because they fought for it, not because it got handed to them.
Right. Disciplined. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think this is a fun question and you kind of alluded to it. Has there been like a couple days when you were like, what are we doing? And what were those and how did you get through those?
There's been a lot of those. The one day with the plumbing was a top one. Another one was having a tenant. Oh, like I said, you just learn these things the hard way. We had a tenant that was a convicted felon, and he was really trying to get his feet back underneath him. And he was the nicest guy. Man, he was a nice guy. And a really great liar, an unbelievable liar. And so I could fill your show with that story, but in the end, that was one of the moments where it's like, wow, we learned the hard way. you know, not to trust everybody and not to maybe believe their story, but there's that. And then, yeah, we've had some really interesting tenant situations, and and then this Christmas Day, we had a tenant call with a backed up toilet, and she said she hadn't flushed anything down there. And sure enough, my husband and our neighbor pull out these flushable wipes, and that doesn't work either. But that was our Christmas Day call. So, it's just, any job has its downsides. And if you just know that's what it comes with the territory, that's what what it is. It is what it is. And in the end, and it's my view of homeschooling too. I don't love homeschooling. It's actually a day-to-day I do not enjoy, but I love the fruit of it. And this is the same thing. Man, I love the fruit of the freedom that we have in our schedule. And I would not give that up for anything. And I don't think there's a single day that my husband wishes that he could go back and sit in a mind-numbing meeting and, and spend his time doing things that he just really feels like are not worth it. So,
gosh, it's so good. So good. It's interesting because I think a lot of people think about passive income and they start getting this allure to passive income.
Right.
Would you call it passive income? Because it doesn't sound like it is. And Brian and I always say, like, it's actually the last thing that we would say is passive. Maybe more passion income. But even that, there's hard work involved. And so, okay, so now knowing back when you're like, oh, passive income, Robert Kiyosaki, great.
Right.
Now where you're at, what would you call that? Would you call it passive?
No, I would almost say in a lot of ways, and you guys probably agree with this, it's more work. It's possibly more work, but passive probably isn't the best. I did a Facebook post on this. Passive probably isn't the best term for it because people think, money just rolls in, but it's freedom of schedule. It's freedom with how taking the reins of your life and putting your energy and efforts into things that you choose to do, and you dictate your time. And yes, it's work. It is sometimes, like I said, work on Christmas Day, but you're in charge of that, and I think that I don't know, maybe it is in a lot of ways it's not passive, but it is in the fact that you're not punching a clock. We get rent even if we're not, working the apartments that day, if that makes sense. So
yeah, and you're managing these properties yourself, keeping that cost, so to speak, or that responsibility. And I think like once, that maybe that were to shift away or you had somebody else manage the properties, then I could see maybe it being a little bit more residual income. But, also there comes with the trade-off of that, of how well they're managed, how well the asset is optimized, that type of thing. So, everything has a risk-reward trade-off on that front.
Yeah. And, obviously there's a day when we will probably want to be more hands-off, but right now we're at a viewpoint where we've seen those managed, some of the fruit of that managed properties, and they aren't managed like the owner would do it. It's just, it just isn't as handled as well as when it's their blood, sweat, and tears into it. So
no one's going to care as much as you guys care.
Right. But there's a trade-off because it is our time and our effort. And so that's the trade-off, but we're hoping our kids will.
How many properties did you decide you guys needed for Duane to quit his job at the
40
beginning?
Was our
40
magic number. 40
doors, 40 units. You mean?
40 doors. Yep.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. And how many do you have now currently?
That's a really good question. Because we do a couple of three of our properties, we owned 50-50 with a neighbor. And so those are not 100% ours. And so because we have half ownership with our neighbor, we actually are responsible for more than that. because of the half ownership. And that, that's one of those things I wouldn't go into that with just anybody, that kind of arrangement, but we've known them for years and just adore them. They've been, and it's just the personalities have worked really well. And that kind of thing too, we started with just buying one property with them and tested the waters. Let's see how this works out. Well, it's working out pretty good. Okay. So let's do this again. And then we're able to work our giftings, the things that we're good at, the things that they're good at, those work together better, and have somebody to fill in because they like to travel a lot and we like to get away once in a while too. So we can fill in for each other.
Smart. Nice. So what's the future for you and Duane? How many do you want? How many do you need? When you look in the future, what does it look like? We are probably, I don't know. There's another 17 we're eyeing, but right now it's not for sale. And I think that's kind of the situation as far as rentals go. If we saw something, if we saw a good deal, we'd jump on it. Mm-hmm. But we're kind of now trying to lean into some different avenues. We've been dabbling in storage units and Airbnbs. Airbnb singular, and we're really kind of liking that. And so I think once you get the idea, and term passive income probably isn't the best, but that kind of business, man, you look at everything differently. You look at car washes differently. You look at laundromats differently, vending machines.
But you guys have kind of that foundation built with the main portfolio that allows you now to kind of look at these other opportunities. Right.
And, what we do, it's not, for lack of a better term, it's not sexy. Like people don't think, oh, wow, they got a really, really flashy property, but we don't care. I don't care that what I do isn't what everybody's flocking to, because, people the kind of properties that we buy, people look over. Well, at the end of the day, what matters is what kind of income does that bring in? And
it's your niche. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah. So.
Well, very good.
Okay. So what would your advice be to somebody who's like got a job and like kind of is like, yeah, man, I don't love my job anymore and I can't do another meeting? What would your advice be to them?
And this is, when people ask me about calling you guys, they say, well, they're automatically going to tell me to do rentals. And I said, no, they're not. Right. They help people find what their passion is, what their gifting is. And I think that's probably the first step, is figuring out if you could spend your time doing anything, what would it be? And, stepping into that kind of plan and figuring out, okay, how would I make this make money? How could I work this to produce an income that can sustain us? And it might be doing something like a rental, at least to get you going. I think that's what's so amazing about what you guys do, is you help people put legs on their dreams and say, okay, how do you do this? What is step one? I was telling a friend or somebody I'd met that, about what we were doing. And that at that time, Duane was going to be leaving his job the next month. And I said, well, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I tell him about what we're doing. And he turns to me and he says, oh, so you actually did something with the information.
Yes.
You actually moved forward. And I think that is, that's the biggest thing, is figure out what you want to do. And you're not married to it. Mm-hmm. If you need to adapt, if you need to change, do that. But I think looking at all these things as an education and a journey and a process, rather than, wow, tomorrow when I wake up, I want to be able to leave my job and have just this great, fantastic side income. That's not how it works. Mm-hmm. And it's part of the journey and process. We are so discouraged from failure.
such a pressure for everything to be good or bad. I feel like instead of like just a stepping stone to, a filtering process to finding out what you're really great at. So I really appreciate you saying that, because we do get a lot of people who are like, oh, do I have to do rental properties now if I meet with you guys? And no, you don't. Actually, you don't. But we do try to meet people where they're at and align with their passions and giftings and skill sets. And sometimes that's real estate and sometimes it's not. So it's fun to uncover that.
Right. And I had a friend recommend your podcast, and so I started listening to it, and I'm like, oh, these guys speak my language. Like this, This is what the world needs is, there's such a disconnect between, say, a book like Rich Dad, Poor Dad and reality. Like, how are you going to put legs on that? How are you going to make that really happen? Not just a someday, not just a, far off dream, but what are you going to do today that makes that goal closer than it was yesterday?
Yeah.
So good. Because in our book, it's funny, we talk about Robert Kiyosaki. And one of the things that we think is lacking in Robert Kiyosaki is a true plan to get you there. Like, yes, it's just weird. It just he doesn't really like get you. It's great ethereal, but at the end of the day, I love what the guy said to you. Oh, you actually did it. Like, yeah, that's the power. Yes. It's doing something with it. Not just reading it on a piece of paper and putting it back on the shelf. And you two are doing it. And that's the thing that I think is powerful is like, hey, the last thing we're going to tell you, this is going to be a smooth process and a smooth road. But what we are telling you is after you jump off the bridge, you won't ever look back and be like, I wish I was back on the bridge, because all you can do is just go float yourself on another bridge if you want to end up doing that. Like,
yes. Yeah.
And the powerful thing I think is understanding, your gifts and, your good and bad experiences, your trials, and working through those together is leaps and bounds. You're learning way more than you ever would be just at like the cubicle doom job. So you and Duane,
you feel alive.
Right.
Yeah. It's what makes you feel alive. And that I felt like the day that he left his job, I felt like we jumped off a bungee jump, that we were bungee jumping. It's like, okay, now this is the free fall. Is something going to catch us? And, it's not what we would have imagined 15 years ago. But here's the other thing. We do say, I wish we would have started this 15 years ago. I wish we would have, I wish we would have started this sooner. We say this to each other all the time. So, it's never too late, but don't put it off. If you want to do it, don't put it off.
Good. That is good. Oh, Kathy, you're great. What other things do we need to talk about, Brian? I feel like
I think we hit it. Yeah.
I do too.
I think the other just main thing was you guys knew your number. You knew what it took to get them out of there, and you made it happen. So, I mean, that's the other piece, I think a lot of people sit in these ideas or want different things, but they don't know how to quantify it. And so bringing those numbers to the table is just pretty crystal clear what you need to get them out. And then you made it happen. So, yeah.
That's good.
All right.
So my closing remark is, if you're thinking about it, contact Brian and Philip. They are amazing and you won't regret it. And even though we kind of had our plan in place, and he'd quit before I think we'd contacted you.
Right.
But they helped. I like to say we know just enough to be dangerous. And what they did was help us not be dangerous, to put fine points on things, our goals. And they know the ins and outs of different things that we did not know. And in the end, it's helped us a lot as far as how the business should be set up and steps that we could take to solidify our position. So
that's good. Well, we didn't plan that. That's really, I appreciate that. And, it's been just fun for both Brian and I just to be able to walk along a lot of families who taken the jump and seeing the fruit of that and seeing like the life just come back into the life. And so if you're thinking about that, or, you want to talk more, man, reach out to us. We'd love to at least encourage you and help you take the leap of faith, because it's worth it. Yeah. And we're really excited to be able to be a part of many stories that are walking down their own uncommon path. And you and Duane's, man, I was super excited when we first got introduced to you. And what I get excited about is the mindset, not about a money or like what's in your wallet, but a mindset. And you two had it pretty, you were down the path. And so both for Brian and I, it was life-giving to be able to put some legs and structure around your plan and be able to watch you guys thrive. So congrats. You're doing awesome.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you've been listening to the Uncommon Life Project. I've been your host, Philip Ramsey.
And I am Brian Dewhurst.
Until next time, go be uncommon. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
That's all for this episode of the Uncommon Life Project, brought to you by Uncommon Wealth Partners. Be sure to visit uncommonwealth.com to learn more about our services. Don't miss an episode as we introduce you to inspiring people who are actively pursuing an uncommon life.